Today on Timescast, Edward Wong reports from Wukan, China, where demonstrators have backed down after heated protests over land seizures. Congress's inability to pass legislation to extend the payroll tax break and jobless benefits will have significant financial consequences for most Americans. And a popular European cartoon makes a comeback in Steven Spielberg's new film, The Adventures of Tintin.
I'm standing here right at the fishing port of Wukan village in Guangdong province. Villagers have been very angry over seizure of land, and the villagers accuse officials in the local area of taking the land and secretly selling it to corporations that then want to develop the land. Around a week and a half ago, the villagers all ran out the party officials here in the village. The villagers built barricades around the village, and it became an autonomous zone. This morning, one of the leaders of the protest here met with provincial officials right outside the village. He came back from the meeting sounding somewhat optimistic, saying that provincial officials had agreed to certain conditions, such as recognizing a temporary council that had been set up in the village, and also releasing some people who had been detained, as well as releasing the body of Sui Jinbo, who is a man who was detained by the police, and villagers say that he was tortured and died. Officials deny any such allegations. In the afternoon, Mr. Lin, the representative, met with some of the other village leaders and elders, and they had a conclave, and they decided that these conditions being met by the government were good enough for the villagers to drop their protests for now.
Basically, they have responded to us, so there is no need to give the government pressure.
There's still no solution to the land problem. It's a common problem all across China. We don't know what's going to happen in the next couple weeks or couple months. When the party officials and the police officers come back in, they might decide to seize the leaders of the protests. Although provincial government officials agreed to return Sui Jinbo's body, they didn't give a timeline for that. And also, we don't know how seriously they'll take an investigation into the death of Sui Jinbo. So a lot of this is unknown right now, and villagers are waiting to see what might happen.
We've got time before the end of the year. Let's do our work like the American people are having to do.
The payroll tax cut was originally part of the stimulus bill, or a version of it was, and then it was extended at the end of last year, and now it's due to expire again. And so this big fight you see in Congress is whether to extend it for 2012. If it's not extended, taxes will go up on most households. It's an average of just under $1,000 per worker for about 160 million workers out there. That's one of the reasons that economists are really quite nervous about this. Some even say it could send the economy into recession again. I think most don't think that. Most think it will significantly slow growth and slow hiring next year if it expires.
Mr. Bennett.
So the question then is, why do we see this stalemate? And we see this stalemate because the two parties really are at fundamental loggerheads over all kinds of things. The Democrats overwhelmingly want to extend this tax cut.
The amendment is agreed to.
Congressional Republicans are more divided. Some of them want to extend it, and you saw a lot of Republican votes in the Senate for extending it. But particularly a lot of people in the House do not.
The motion is not adopted without objection.
And there are really two things going on here. Some are skeptical of the effect of temporary tax cuts, the idea of dribbing and drabbing little bits of money each year. They say the thing that stimulates the economy is permanent tax cuts. The other issue, though, is what they would get in return for extending this payroll tax cut. If this were simply an up or down vote on the payroll tax cut, I think it could pass relatively easily. The question is, what price can Republicans exact from Democrats for extending it? And a lot of the focus has now been on this pipeline, whether Democrats will agree to this pipeline running through the middle of the country. And I think when you put this together, you understand why expectations are so low for Congress getting anything done in 2012. There are these basic disagreements. We are probably not going to see them resolved until the American people weigh in again and kind of break the tie of the 2008 and 2010 elections, in which one party perhaps gets more control than either one has right now.
Turn this ship round. Aye, sir! Get me a flare!
And Steven Spielberg's movie, The Adventures of Tintin, is now in theaters.
Captain, get down! Get down!
It's based on a series of comic books that Americans don't know very well. They're books about a character I'm going to snobbishly call Tintin, because that is how he would call himself. He was the creation of a Belgian cartoonist named Georges Remy, who went by the pen name Hergé. That Spielberg would choose these comics as his inspiration is not entirely surprising, because the comics themselves are very cinematic. There are long shots, there are close-ups, there are sudden switches and transitions, and they're meticulously drawn. On the other hand, the movie doesn't look very much like the Tintin books. Maybe that's inevitable, maybe it's part of Spielberg's choice. It was shot in motion capture, which is a look all of its own. I think you could argue that in this movie it almost takes over, but it's a plusher look than the original Hergé drawings, which have that same wonderful comic book flatness while somehow performing that magic trick of making the picture seem to move. Interesting thing to me is to see, one, if the movie catches on in America, and two, will it drive people back to these comic books? It remains to be seen. They are dated in their way, they're old-fashioned, I suppose, and yet they have an appeal of their own that hasn't gone away. They're just different, and maybe different is good.